I want to start with a moment that many caregivers recognize immediately. You've prepared a meal, something simple, something the person used to enjoy. You've set the table, you've sat down together, and you're hoping, genuinely hoping, that this mealtime will go smoothly. And it doesn't. They push the food around the plate. They seem confused by what's in front of them. They take a few bites and then stop, even though you know they haven't eaten enough today. Or they resist the meal entirely, and you're left wondering whether to push or let it go, and feeling guilty either way. If that scene is familiar to you, I want to start with something important. What you're navigating at mealtimes isn't a failure of preparation or a failure of patience. It's one of the most genuinely difficult aspects of Alzheimer's caregiving, one that the disease makes complicated in ways that go far beyond simple appetite or food preference. And the guidance from the National Institute on Aging on Feeding and Nutrition for People with Alzheimer's is specific, practical, and, once you understand why these strategies work, makes complete sense in terms of how the disease affects the brain and the body. Today we're going to walk through all of it. What causes eating difficulties in Alzheimer's, what actually helps, and how to approach mealtimes in a way that is less stressful and more nourishing for both of you. And I want to build towards something that most caregivers discover too late, a specific approach to the mealtime environment itself that research suggests can make a measurable difference in how much a person with Alzheimer's actually eats, independent of what food is offered. Stay with me. Let's start by understanding why eating becomes difficult in the first place. Because once you understand the reasons, the strategies stop feeling like arbitrary tips and start feeling like direct responses to specific problems. The NIA identifies several contributing factors to poor appetite and eating difficulty in people with Alzheimer's. Medication side effects. Many common medications can reduce appetite or alter the sense of taste. Decreased physical activity. When the body is less active, hunger signals diminish. And a decreased sense of taste and smell, a change that, as we've discussed in earlier videos, can affect how appealing food seems even when the person is genuinely hungry. But Alzheimer's also introduces challenges that go beyond simple appetite suppression. The disease affects how the brain processes visual information. A full plate with multiple different foods can be genuinely confusing. Too much visual information to parse, too many choices to navigate simultaneously. Something that a person without Alzheimer's would experience as a normal, appealing meal can register to someone with the disease as overwhelming and difficult to engage with. The disease affects recognition. A fork may no longer clearly announce its purpose. A plate may not be immediately understood as something to eat from. The familiar rituals and automatic behaviors of mealtime, which we all take for granted, may require active cognitive work that is becoming harder and harder to perform, and it affects communication. When the person with Alzheimer's is uncomfortable, in pain, or simply confused by the meal, they may not be able to tell you. What shows up instead is resistance, distraction, pushing food away, or simply not eating. Understanding these layers doesn't solve every mealtime challenge, but it does something important. It removes the interpretation that the person is being difficult. They're not. They're responding to a cognitive reality that makes something as seemingly simple as eating genuinely complicated. Let's talk about what actually helps, starting with the food itself. The NIA's guidance on nutrition for people with Alzheimer's emphasizes familiar, liked foods first. This is not the moment to introduce new foods or attempt to optimize the diet with unfamiliar healthy options. The goal is food that the person will actually eat, because food that's nutritionally excellent but rejected provides no benefit at all. Offer the foods they have always liked. Prepare them the way they have always been prepared. Familiarity, in the context of Alzheimer's, is not settling for less. It's working with what the brain can still easily process and respond to. When appetite is genuinely reduced, when the person is eating far less than their body needs, caloric density becomes the priority. Offering smaller, more frequent meals rather than 3 full meals gives you more opportunities to provide nutrition throughout the day without requiring the person to sustain engagement with a large meal. Calorie-rich snacks between meals, something sweet, something familiar, something easy, can supplement what's consumed at formal mealtimes. The NIA specifically mentions sweetening food with honey or syrup when caloric intake is a concern. This is not about indulgence. Sweet tastes are often among the last flavor perceptions to remain intact as Alzheimer's progresses. Offering something sweet can engage the appetite when other foods no longer do. For caregivers managing meals for someone who lives alone, or for caregivers who cannot be present for every meal, meal delivery services are a practical and important resource. Meals on Wheels America at 888-998-6325 delivers nutritious, home-delivered meals that remove the cooking and preparation burden while ensuring the person has access to food. Meal kit services that provide pre-made salads, microwavable portions, and easy-to-prepare options can also reduce the complexity of self-managed nutrition in earlier stages of the disease. A phone call reminder to eat for someone still living alone can be genuinely effective. A simple, caring prompt that cues the mealtime routine when internal signals may no longer reliably do so. Now let's talk about the mealtime environment, because here's where most caregivers get it wrong, and where the difference is measurable. Most caregivers focus almost entirely on the food, what to serve, how to prepare it, how to make it appealing. And while food choices matter, the NIA's guidance makes clear that the environment in which food is offered is equally important, and often more easily controlled. This next detail changes everything about how you think about feeding someone with Alzheimer's. The mealtime environment should be quiet and minimally distracting. Turn off the television, turn off the radio, reduce background noise as much as possible. Because for a person with Alzheimer's, whose cognitive resources are already being stretched to navigate the meal itself, competing sensory input is not background. It's a significant cognitive demand that pulls resources away from the task of eating. Serve meals in a consistent, familiar place. The same chair, the same table, the same setting, whenever possible. Consistency reduces the cognitive work of orientation. When the environment is familiar, the brain can use its available resources for eating rather than for figuring out where it is and what's happening. Keep the setting simple. A plate with one food item at a time is less overwhelming than a full plate with multiple items. A clear, simple arrangement is easier to process than a complex, visually busy table. You're reducing cognitive load at every possible point so that eating can happen. And bring your own presence to the table as a resource. The NIA describes mealtimes as opportunities for social interaction and recommends a warm, calm, unhurried tone of voice. You are not just providing food. You are providing a relational anchor. Your calm communicates that this is a safe, unhurried moment. Your warmth invites engagement. Your patience creates space for the person to process and participate at their own pace. Don't rush. Don't push. Give them time to finish each mouthful before offering more. These aren't just practical instructions. They're a relational posture that makes the entire mealtime experience less stressful for both of you. Now let's get specific about physical feeding assistance. Because as Alzheimer's progresses, independent eating becomes more difficult, and the transition from prompting to active assistance requires its own thoughtful approach. We're approaching the section of today's video that I've been building toward. Stay with me, because what I'm going to share in the next few minutes is the guidance that experienced caregivers consistently say they wished they'd known sooner. When independent eating becomes difficult, the NIA recommends a graduated approach that preserves as much autonomy as possible for as long as possible. Start with gentle prompting. Verbal cues, pick up the fork, take a bite, can prompt automatic behaviors that the person may no longer initiate independently, but can still execute when cued. Many people with Alzheimer's retain physical motor sequences that their cognitive initiation can no longer trigger. The verbal cue serves as the missing starting signal. When prompting alone isn't sufficient, hand-over-hand guidance can bridge the gap between independence and full assistance. You place your hand gently over the person's hand while they hold the utensil and guide the movement together, their hand doing as much of the work as possible, your hand providing direction and support. This approach preserves physical participation even when cognitive initiation is limited. And physical participation, doing as much of the feeding themselves as possible, supports both dignity and sensory engagement with the meal. When full feeding assistance is needed, the NIA's guidance on positioning is specific and important. The person should always be in an upright, seated position during the meal and remain upright for at least 20 minutes afterward. This significantly reduces the risk of aspiration, food or liquid entering the lungs, which is one of the most serious complications of swallowing difficulties in later-stage Alzheimer's. Sit beside the person rather than directly in front. This is one of those specific small details that caregivers often don't know, and that makes a real difference. Sitting directly in front can feel confrontational or intimidating. Sitting beside positions you as a companion and collaborator rather than someone overseeing or directing. It changes the relational dynamic of the meal in subtle but meaningful ways. Offer one thing at a time. A bite of food, then a small sip from a cup rather than a straw, then another bite. Not a plate full of different foods presented simultaneously. Sequential, manageable offerings that give the person time to process each element before the next is introduced. Here's the part I want you to stay for. Everything I've covered so far, the quiet environment, the consistent setting, the hand-over-hand guidance, the sequential offerings, these are all specific responses to what the disease does to the brain. They reduce cognitive load. They support autonomy. They create conditions in which eating is more possible. But there's something deeper in the NIA's guidance that I want to name explicitly, because it reframes the entire mealtime conversation. Food, for a person with Alzheimer's, is not just nutrition. It's one of the remaining arenas where sensory pleasure, social connection, and moments of normalcy can still happen. The warmth of a familiar meal, the sweetness of something they've always loved, the simple comfort of sitting with someone who cares about them while eating something good. These experiences matter, not because the person will remember the specific meal, but because the experience of pleasure, comfort, and connection, these are real in the moment they occur. And for a person whose world is becoming increasingly narrowed by the disease, a genuinely pleasant mealtime is not a small thing. It's a meaningful window of quality. This is why the NIA's guidance consistently emphasizes the relational dimension of mealtimes, not just the mechanics of nutrition. It's why patience, warmth, and unhurried presence are named alongside practical feeding techniques. Because how the meal happens is not separate from the nourishment it provides. It's part of it. Let me also address something that caregivers often struggle with in later stages of Alzheimer's, and that involves a genuinely difficult set of decisions. In the late stages of Alzheimer's, appetite naturally declines. This is part of the disease's progression and the body's natural process. The NIA's guidance is explicit. Avoid overfeeding or force feeding. In the later stages, the goal shifts from optimizing nutrition to maintaining comfort and honoring the body's natural changes rather than fighting against them. This can be profoundly difficult for caregivers whose instinct is to nourish, to sustain, to keep providing in tangible ways. Food is love in many cultures and families. The act of feeding someone is an act of care, and when that person isn't eating, when they seem to be retreating from food, the caregiver's distress is real and understandable. But forcing food on someone who is resisting it, particularly in later stages, can cause distress, can increase aspiration risk, and is ultimately not something the body can use effectively. The conversation with the person's healthcare team about how to approach nutrition in the later stages is an important one to have. They can provide guidance that is specific to where the person is in the disease progression and what the most compassionate approach looks like. Hospice and palliative care teams, in particular, have specific expertise in supporting families through these decisions with both clinical guidance and emotional support. Let's bring everything together with practical actions. The first is to simplify the mealtime environment before you simplify the food. Turn off the television and radio. Reduce background noise. Keep the table setting uncluttered and clear. Offer one food at a time rather than a full plate. These environmental changes can improve mealtime engagement significantly, and they cost nothing. The second is to anchor mealtimes in routine and familiarity. Same time, same place, same setting as much as possible. Serve the foods the person has always liked, prepared the way they've always been prepared. Familiarity reduces cognitive load and makes engagement more likely. This is not giving up on nutrition. It's working with how the brain functions now. The third is to graduate your assistance gradually and preserve autonomy at every stage. Start with verbal prompting. Progress to hand-over-hand guidance when needed. Transition to full assistance only when necessary. And always sit beside rather than directly in front. Always maintain upright positioning. Always ensure adequate time between bites. These specifics are not arbitrary. They directly address the physical and cognitive realities of the disease. The fourth is to use meal delivery services to reduce your planning and preparation burden. Meals on Wheels at 888-998-6325, meal kit services, pre-made options from the grocery store. These reduce the daily labor of nutrition management and ensure the person has access to food even when your time and energy are stretched. And the fifth is to bring your presence as consciously as your food, your calm, your warmth, your patient, unhurried attention. These are not nice additions to a good mealtime. They are foundational to it. The research on social eating in people with Alzheimer's consistently supports the idea that the relational environment of a meal affects both the experience and the intake. You are not just providing nutrition. You are providing one of the remaining arenas of genuine pleasure and connection in this person's life. That is not a small thing. That is a profound and daily act of love. Here's what I want you to carry with you from today. Feeding someone with Alzheimer's is hard, not because you're doing it wrong, but because the disease makes it genuinely complex, affecting appetite, sensory perception, visual processing, motor initiation, and the cognitive work of navigating a meal. Every difficulty you encounter at mealtimes has a reason rooted in the biology of the disease. And within that complexity, the guidance that works is not complicated. Quiet, familiar, consistent, patient, one thing at a time. Beside rather than in front. Warmth rather than urgency. These are not high-tech interventions. They're human ones. They're the kinds of care that don't require equipment or expertise, only attention, patience, and the willingness to keep showing up at the table day after day for someone who needs you there. That is exactly what you're doing, and it matters more than you know. Before you go, I want to plant something in your mind for our next conversation. Throughout this series, we've covered an enormous amount of ground, from healthy eating and exercise for older adults through the full arc of Alzheimer's disease and caregiving. And we've been building toward a conversation that ties much of it together. It's about what it means to plan for your own future with genuine intention. The advanced care planning, the legal documents, the conversations with family about your own wishes, the things that most people defer indefinitely and that, when done early and thoughtfully, create one of the most meaningful gifts you can give to the people who love you. We'll explore that next, clearly, honestly, and with the respect it deserves. If you want to be there, if you want to keep building a complete, grounded understanding of how to age well, plan wisely, and care deeply, subscribe to this channel. Take good care of yourself. The work you're doing, at the table, every day, is one of the most human things there is.